Yes, renewable energy. It is the hope of the future, and I think something that's very viable in the future. It's going to take years and years to transition so that no one gets caught up in uh, the miscues between transitioning off fossil fuels and green energy, but I am hopeful for the future. I'm kind of in the middle on that. Yes, we need to do it, but also it's going to take some time so that no one starves or civilization doesn't crumble because of it. But in any case, you would think that anything involving renewable energy would be positive, and it is, in theory. But it also, with governments pushing programs to bring in green energy, there's also been some scandals, and that's what we're going to look at today, where with the use of green energy and some simple spreadsheet issues, somebody was able to defraud the government out of millions and got caught because he liked cars. Yes, believe it or not, he got caught because he liked cars. So let's check out the green energy scam on a Keto and Crime classic. Let's do it.
Keto and Crime, Keto and Crime. We uncover the grime on Keto and Crime. Keto and Crime, Keto and Crime. Now is the time for Keto and Crime.
Hey everyone, Tracy here from Keto and Crime. Thank you so much to every single one of my patrons and channel members. You make this possible. And you're one of the reasons I do this, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if I haven't said it before, thank you. I'll sing it. Thank you for hanging in there with me and letting me geek out, not making fun of me like a lot of other people do, because I like weird stuff about crime and dark history. Thanks, everyone. Welcome back to Keto and Crime and Thought Crime. Today, we've got a story of fraud in the renewable energy world. Yes, those wonderful biodiesels and things like that help minimize our dependence on fossil fuels and foreign oil can be a proving ground for fraud. In the early part of the 2000s, 2005, President Bush passed the Renewable Fuel Standards Program Act that allowed federal subsidies through the Environmental Protection Agency, tax credits, subsidies, and wrote into law some rules that basically granted these things to both green energy producers and regular fuel companies that sponsored the use of green fuels. Now, it basically forced oil companies to do one of two things: either produce biodiesel or other renewable energies on their own, or to sponsor and purchase the fuels that were made by smaller producers. And this was done in a couple of different ways. And as a result, you had a lot of companies looking to buy these things instead of producing them, because it's a lot cheaper to buy it than to produce it because of all the manpower it takes. Now, biodiesel, the biodiesel we're talking about is historically made from agricultural products. So corn, soybeans, they can take the worst lots and kind of grind them down to make fuel. Also, it can recycle things like cooking grease from restaurants and turn it into a usable form of fuel. Think of, the E85 fuel and things like that, along those lines. And so the mechanisms needed to create this type of biodiesel are very intricate and very complicated. It would take like a fuel company, oil company can't just do it in their normal production facilities or refinery facilities. They would have to build specialized places to do this. So in turn, it turns out to be a lot cheaper just to buy this biofuel and get it into circulation from other smaller producers that are already doing it. So you had these producers that are, jumping up and starting to create this biofuel. But as it always does, it also creates a supply chain. And part of the supply chain is a cottage industry known as brokering. Now, brokering is is basically a middleman. You have mortgage brokers that find the perfect home loan for you. You have real estate brokers that work with several real estate agents and help you find. You have insurance brokers that work with several insurance companies and help you find the best plan. Well, you have trucking brokers that help find independent truckers' loads. And for this industry, you had energy brokers that helped the fuel companies fulfill their obligation to the new law by finding them smaller producers and helping them purchase their biodiesel. Basically, they were purchasing credits from these producers to help them continue to produce biodiesel as a form of social responsibility. So you had these brokers that popped up. And along with that, you have a lot of opportunists. The years 2009 to 2012, you had two really large cases that came before federal judges about abuses of this system. One we're going to cover today happened in Maryland. Another one happened in New Jersey. And the one in New Jersey was much bigger. And if you want to hear more about it, let me know down below. I'll be happy to do a episode on it. But it involved Caravan Trading, which was one of these energy brokers that supposedly was buying up the raw product to make this biodiesel. Specifically, they were buying the used cooking grease from restaurants in the New Jersey, New York area, and then selling it to another facility in Indiana that would actually take these raw components, make them into the biodiesel, and then sell it out. So they were trading shares or credits for this. But actually what was going on is a scheme in the energy industry known as 𝐜𝐚𝐬, where they were basically selling, yes, they were buying this cooking oil and they were selling it to this biorefinery, but the biorefinery was then just shipping out the raw product, selling it to other refineries. So they were basically just marking it up and reselling it to other producers, and they were making, 50 cents to $1 on the credit for it. And that ended up being a $50 million scheme when it was all said and done. And then you had the one we're going to talk about that took place in Maryland. That was even though it was much smaller, it culminated in $9 million worth of fraud, but it was a lot more interesting because it was literally a one-man show. So let's get into it. Rodney Hailey, we don't know a lot about his early days. We do know he's a native of Maryland and actually had a few arrests for things like stealing gas. So evidently he always had an affinity for fuel for some reason. And what we do know about him is he was quite the big talker. He could talk his way into any sort of deal. He could talk his way out of any sort of problem. And he had a propenity for tall tales. And so in 2009, he decided to jump on the EPA bandwagon and filed his company, Clean Green Fuels, under the EPA as a producer of biodiesel. Now, one thing you have to know about a lot of government programs, it's the trust system. They don't really inspect like they should. I know I used to work in the poultry processing industry back when I was a teenager, and we had USD inspectors that would come through, but not EPA inspectors, because even then EPA was around to make sure we weren't dumping waste where we shouldn't. So we only saw them and OSHA once in a blue moon. So EPA the same here. When a person applied, they did a fundamental check, like checking out the addresses, their criminal history, that sort of thing, which I don't understand. The guy had already been arrested for trying to steal gas. Maybe it was expunged. I don't know. But in any case, he got in good standing with the EPA because they didn't really check him out. And he founded his company in the Baltimore area. Now, he did actually buy rent a small office building in downtown in downtown Baltimore, in a little strip mall, and he actually employed about 8 or 9 people in this office, so it looked like, corporate headquarters of a fuel company, so he did have that going for him. But what he was doing was basically pulling a bait and switch. Now, when it comes to brokers and fuel companies that want to simply purchase the credits associated with another producer's fuel, biofuel, what they do is purchase a bunch of RINs, R-I-N, which stands for Renewable Identification Numbers. And basically there's a RIN attached to every gallon of biodiesel. It's a unique number attached to that gallon of biodiesel, and that shows that that gallon was actually produced. Now, there's two types. There's basically the attached and the unattached varieties. The attached actually are sent out in a manifest with the biodiesel, showing the gallons of biodiesel that are associated with those numbers in that batch. And if a biodiesel broker is buying for a actual business that uses the biodiesel, this is what they would do. They would buy not only the biodiesel, but they would also buy the credits or the numbers associated with those, and they would go together so that they get the benefit on each side. But there are a lot of oil companies that work through brokers that simply buy the numbers to show that they funded or helped to fund the production of a lot of biodiesel, of a batch of biodiesel. And still, you have about 1 rand per 1 to 1.5 gallons of biodiesel. So every number, and these were 16 to 24 digit numbers that were unique and represented 1 to 1.5 gallons of biodiesel. And so this is the business that Mr. Hailey got into in March of 2009 when he filed his company with the EPA. He basically got into the business of producing RINs, but not the associated biodiesels. He never had a plant. He never had a refinery of any sort. He simply produced these numbers and sold them to brokers, who then turned around and sold them to energy producers or the energy companies that were required to buy biodiesel or fund biodiesel in some way, shape, or form. How did he do this? With a simple spreadsheet program. He would basically generate the numbers, and he used a spreadsheet program to generate basically spreadsheet after spreadsheet of these random numbers, and then he would sell those as low as 12 cents a RIN or a number, up to 50 cents a number. And if you're producing hundreds of thousands, you can get into some money there. Just think about it. And it's very easy to do. Hey everyone, I wanted to just kind of demonstrate how easy it was for Mr. Hailey to deceive the federal government by just mass producing RINs. So here I've got a basic Excel spreadsheet open. And what I've done here is just typed in a basic long string of numbers. They could be any length numbers. I believe the RINs were between 16 and 24 digits. But I've done a slightly shorter one here. So I just typed this in. Just typed it in. And then here, under the second one, I did a simple formula, which was basically adding 1 to whatever number is in A1. So that's the basic formula I put in 2, which generated another number, just adding 1 to it. And with this, I can simply generate limitless numbers of numbers just by sharing the formula to each cell, and for each cell it's going to add 1 to the cell in front of it. So if you'll take a look here. And there you go. And so all I would have to do is drag it all the way down. I could come up here, do the same thing, all the way down, and I could mass produce hundreds of thousands of these numbers on a spreadsheet in just about an hour's time. So imagine getting hundreds of thousands of dollars for an hour's work. That's what Mr. Hailey was doing. All right. Not saying any of you should do that at all, but that's how he did it. And so basically what he would do, once he was on the EPA's list as a producer of biofuels, the brokers came calling because they needed the RINs to sell to the fuel companies. And basically they would just call him up, they would negotiate on a price, he would tell them how many RINs, now remember each one of these should have a gallon to 1.5 gallons of biodiesel attached to them. He would tell them how much he was producing, and they would agree on a price. he would send RINs on spreadsheets, and he would send the spreadsheets to the broker, who would turn around and sell them to the fuel companies, who would then pay Mr. Hailey. And that's how he did it. Now, the EPA was of the opinion that the brokers or the fuel companies should do the inspecting to make sure they're actually buying biofuel and that it's a reputable, conscientious company. Whereas the private companies and the brokerages are of the opinions that EPA should be doing that. So you can imagine nothing ever got done. So basically he went on for several years, 2.5 years that we know about, selling these RINs. And he was selling millions of RINs, which means each year he was producing, if he was actually producing biofuel, he was producing enough RINs that would show him as the number 3 producer of biofuel in the United States. That's how many of these numbers he was cranking out per year. Now, occasionally a broker would get antsy about it, and they would want to know the address of his factory. He's actually been caught on phone actually admitting he doesn't know the address of his own factory, and he would have to call them back.
What's the address of the plant?
Good question. I don't know myself. Shoot, it's 7500 on Pulaski Highway. But I honestly, I don't know it myself. I know that's bad. I know my corporate address. I don't know that address. Well, let me call you back. I'll get it for you.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep. Give me a call back.
He also, when pressed for pictures of his production facility, would actually just download pictures from the internet and send those to the brokers. And for a long time, that bought him the time he needed. They would accept that. Now, few brokers did get to where they weren't really accepting his excuses anymore, so they did reach out to the EPA and suggest that maybe the EPA should do a investigation. And in 2011, they did just that. They went to his office. They asked for a tour of his facility. He first took them to the heart of Baltimore's fuel industry, which there's a lot of fuel companies there, and said that his production facility was there, although he couldn't take them to the building. He then took them to a garage, a large double garage, across town from where the fuel industry was located, and showed them a facility that had 3 large drums or large tanks that could be used for biodiesel, and a water source that was pretty much a garden hose thrown through the ceiling, hanging down. And this is what he tried to pass off as his facility. Of course, the EPA, he did try to tell them that he was in the process of moving, and that's the reason they were in flux, but this was it. Now, he also showed them the pictures and things like that. The EPA wasn't convinced, and they did reach out to the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice said they would launch an investigation, but it could take 5 months to a year to actually get anything going. And in the meantime, the EPA did not file an injunction or anything, and he was free to continue on doing what he was doing. And he was able to pump out a lot more RINs. Now, his downfall came at his own hands, honestly, because I don't think that investigation would have went anywhere, because he said he was in the process of moving. I think in the end he might have just said, hey, I closed it down, no longer doing it, what have you. Because at this point he's getting close to $9 million that he's made doing this. And he's only paid a few office employees, which I don't understand how he was able to keep it from them, but, people are dumb. Or can be dumb. Sorry about that. But his own flaunting of his wealth became his undoing. He started buying a lot of luxury cars. Some reports say he bought a Rolls-Royce Phantom for his wife. He bought 2 Lamborghinis in the same day. And what the FBI and the Department of Justice that were doing their investigation did start to note that his purchases, that Clean Green's purchases, often matched the entirety of the revenue that was taken in that week. If he bought if he brought in $500,000 in a week, $500,000 went out for what looked like Mr. Hailey's personal expenses. He did pay, income tax and payroll tax on his employees, but beyond that, everything else went out for what looked to be personal expenses. There was never any expenses for a production plant, for production plant employees. There was never a payment to a third party refinery that could be producing his biofuel. Nothing that would show he had a facility. And so they were starting to kind of build their portfolio of evidence that way. And then he bought and paid cash for a house in a posh Baltimore suburb and moved in with his wife and started to also move in all of his luxury cars. At one point, he had 14 luxury cars, high-end, over $100,000 cars, parked up and down the streets of this very narrow subdivision. If you've ever been to Baltimore, it's near D.C., it's a very small city, and most of its suburbs are very small with very narrow streets, as a lot of things in the Northeast are. So he was basically taking up the entire subdivision with his luxury cars, and let's just say he was creating a disturbance in the neighborhood. So much is that the local school bus, driven for the local district, refused to turn into the subdivision to go get the children of the subdivision because he was afraid of hitting these luxury cars and getting the school district in a lawsuit. So an email was sent out saying he would meet the children at the main road. So you had all these parents having to walk their children in the morning to the bus, put them on the bus, and then go back and get them in the afternoon instead of them just being dropped off in front of their own home like normal or on the same street as their home. You also had people that lived in the subdivision getting aggravated because they had to weave around this, maze of luxury cars.
Get off the road. No, I'm not moving. All right, what do I do right now? You did not just honk at me.
Afraid they were going to hit it, and you had a lot of community outrage about this. You had a lot of police called, and eventually the police realized there was an investigation of this guy going on, and they started coordinating with the FBI and basically kind of jumped in on the investigation. It was also discovered during this time that Mr. Hailey was also collecting unemployment benefits at the same time. Maryland unemployment benefits. At the same time, he was producing millions of dollars in revenue from false RINs. And eventually it all came to a head on a May Day in 2012 when the FBI swarmed his home. They arrested him, they confiscated all of his luxury cars, and he faced 32 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and violations of the Clean Air Act for faking the production of biodiesel. And in late 2012, the sentence came down. He was sentenced to 151 months in prison, even though he had remained in prison the entire time that he was awaiting trial, and also ended up having to pay restitution of $42 million back. So as you can imagine, all his luxury cars gone, his house gone. He was in prison for 12 years and will probably never earn much over minimum wage the rest of his life once the settlement takes him, because they're going to either garnish his wages or he's going to end up filing bankruptcy. And there you go. But such was the end of the clean green fuels racket, which to me was amazing. He was able to get away with it for so long, just selling literally spreadsheets full of numbers to brokers, and no one checked it out. There have been huge changes to the EPA, how they judge biodiesel producers, and so everyone is inspected. They also have a online verification system for proving that a RIN is actually attached to a gallon of biofuel. So things aren't exactly as easily manipulated as they once were, which is why he got away with it and the people at Caravan Traders got away with it for so long. But that's the end of this case. That's the story. What do you think? Whose fault do you think this is? Is it his? Is it the government? Is it everybody's? Is it the brokers? Is it the fuel companies for not more closely investigating? Tell me what you think down below. Also, if you would like to support the channel. Links are below. I'll be back soon. My friend Michelle and I will be tackling the Spanish flu outbreak of 1918. I think it's very fitting, considering what we're going through. We'll be tackling that as a episode of my mystery history stories. So check back for that. Be back real soon. Till next time, Keto Comic.